All right, I'm going to pick up where we left off. So we are on example 2, letter B. And so what I'm going to give you here is we're going to write an equation of an exponential in the form y equals ab to the x. We're going to use a graph this time, but still kind of giving 2 points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you another way of doing this, and that's by using a system. So sometimes like doing the table method that I did before isn't always the best option, depending on what your points are. So I'm going to show you another more algebraic way of doing it. So if we have this equation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this point and I'm going to plug it into my equation for x and y. So I'm going to do 224 equals a times b to the negative 3. I'm also going to then take this point and write another equation, doing the exact same thing. So 14 equals a times b to the negative 1. Now I have two equations with two unknowns. And if you remember, that's basically a system. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use substitution, and I'm going to solve this system. So it doesn't really matter which one you use. I'm going to go ahead and solve this equation for a. And now we're going to go ahead and take this a value and plug it into my other equation to solve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up solving for b. So I get 14 equals 224 divided by b to the negative 3 times b to the negative 1. Okay, so if I do the algebra here, and the b to the negative 1 comes to the bottom, and the b to the negative 3 comes to the top, I would get 224b squared. So I'm going to grab my calculator. I'm going to take 14 divided by 224, and I get 0.0625 equals b squared. I'm going to grab my calculator. I'm going to square root that answer, and I get 0.25 or 1/4. So what I did here is I solved for my b value. And so that's kind of half of my problem. The other part then is where I have to solve for a. So now that I know that b is 1/4, I'm going to plug it back into this equation, solve for a. So 224 over 0.25 to the negative 3, or 1/4 to the negative 3, equals a. Grab my calculator. 224 divided by 0.25 raised to the negative 3. I get 3.5. So what I figured out here is now I've got my b value and my a value. I can write my equation. So if I have my y equals ab to the x, I know that a was 3.5. I know my b value was 1/4 or 0.25. And now this is my final equation. So what this allows us to do is to be able to kind of have a plan in case we can't figure out the pattern in the table, and this will always work for exponentials, kind of setting up a system. All right, I'm going to show you another example. And this one it says, does the table, I messed up here, but does the table represent an exponential function? If so, find the equation. So on this one, there's going to be a couple questions in your homework where you are going to be asked to determine if it's exponential. And so I want you to kind of get in the habit of like looking, basically. So negative 3 to 1, I'm just going to look at our x values, is an increase of 4. And then 1 to 5, and this is basically what we did in example 1, right? We looked to see that, okay, our x values are all increasing by a constant amount. And if it's exponential, how we figure out that common multiplier is we take the 9.5 and we divide by 3. So I'm going to get about 3.1, we're going to round to 2 decimal places. So about 3.1217. I'm going to do the same thing for 32 divided by 9.5, and I get 3.37. So I'm going to do the next one. So I'm going to get 108 divided by 32, 3.38. And then the last one, 360 divided by 108. So 360 divided by 108, and I get 3.33. So you will notice that this isn't 100% exact, right? So this isn't obviously increasing by the exact same amount, but we're looking for kind of a generalization here. is this kind of representing an exponential relationship? And the answer is yes, it is, because our common multiplier is pretty close. I would say it's averaging about 3.34, maybe, somewhere around that way. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and write our equation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of use the same method that we used above. So I'm going to take my equation. I'm going to pick any 2 points. I think maybe I'll pick the first two, and I'm going to plug in. I'm going to plug them in and solve my system. So I'm going to plug in 3 for y and -3 for b, or x, I'm sorry. And then my other equation, I'm going to plug in the 1 and the 9.5. Oops. This should say 9.5 equals a times b to the first power. I'm going to solve one of my equations. This time I'll do this one just for fun. I'm going to solve this for a, and I'm going to plug this back into my equation and solve for b. So I get 9.5 over b to the first times b to the -3. All right, be careful with your exponent properties here. You should get 9.5. The b to the -3 will move to the bottom, which ends up giving me 9.5 over b to the fourth. I'm going to multiply both sides by b to the fourth. And then I'm going to divide by 3. I get b to the fourth equals 3.17. And then I'm going to take the fourth root. So in my calculator, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this number here and I'm going to hit the caret key and I'm going to raise it to the 1/4. Because remember, raising it to the 1/4 is the same thing as saying, like taking the fourth root. So I get about 1.33 as my b value. And why that's important is because, like in this one, you will notice that it's common to think that this would be my my b value. But the problem is that our x's aren't increasing by 1. And so we can't just use this value as our b value. As you notice, we kind of got like, when we solved it here, and then we had to take the fourth root. So I think some of the ones that you do on Big Ideas is going to have multiple choice. So make sure it makes sense, right? So you know that your common multiplier can't be 3 point something because we're not increasing by 1 here. If we are increasing by 1, then yes, this would be your common multiplier. So I got 1.33. The other thing I want you to notice is that you should kind of be looking for your 0 value here. I didn't give that to you on your table, but you can kind of make an estimate. When x is 0, your y value should be between 3 and 9.5. So hopefully if you get an answer or if you're looking at multiple choice, you would want to kind of use this kind of common sense to be able to say, okay, let's look at an a value, which is like your initial value. It should be between 3 and 9.5. So if you had some choices here and you had a choice of like 10 times something to the whatever power, that's probably not correct because according to my table here, my initial value needs to be between 3 and 9.5 because that's kind of where 0 is going to land. To figure it out exactly, I'm going to go back and I'm going to substitute it in. So a equals 9.5 divided by 1.33. And I get about 7.13-ish. So that kind of makes sense, right? So if you go back here, about 7.13, that's realistic to what we kind of expect our answer to be. So now that we've got our a value and our b value, I'm going to go ahead and write my equation. And again, we rounded it a little bit here, so obviously it's not 100% perfect, but this is what I get for my equation. All right, let's go through another example. This last one, what I wanted to show you is actually kind of cool. I wanted to just show you some options. You're not really going to have to do this on your homework, but this is going to come into play a lot when you're in pre-calc and so forth. You want to make sure you know how to use the calculator. So I'm going to show you a couple cool things with the calculator here. You won't have to necessarily do this when you are doing your Big Ideas assignments, but this is just kind of a bonus. All right, so what I'm given you here is just like a story problem situation. So this X's are representing the year, and the Y values representing like trampoline sales, so number of trampolines. And what we're going to talk about is how to write the equation, but not do it by hand. I'm going to show you how your calculator can generate that equation rather than going through with the process that we just did. So the first thing I want you to do, locate your stat button on your calculator, which is located kind of right above the program button. I want you to hit edit, so just hit enter. And I'm going to clear my lists. So if you have stuff in your list, you just put your cursor on the top and you hit the clear button and enter. And it just clears everything out of here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these X values and put them into list 1. And I'm going to take all of these Y values and put them into list 2. So I'm going to do X value, I'm going to do 1 enter, 2 enter, 3 enter, 4 enter, 5 enter, 6 enter, and 7 enter. So now my list 1 is 1 through 7. My list on my table here is 1 through 7. Now I'm just going to enter in those numbers. So I'm going to do 15, 23, 40, 52, 80, 105, and 140. All right, so what I just basically did here is stored my data into my calculator. I'm now going to show you how to do a scatter plot. So what you want to do is you want to hit second y equals. And what it should do is bring up this screen here. And it might say off up here, and that's fine. So hit enter. You want to make sure it's turned on. So just make sure that your cursor's on the on button and that it's like, if you hit enter, it'll select it. You have your options of what kinds of graphs you want to do. Scatter plot, line plot, histogram, box and whisker, a couple different kinds, and then another different kind of line plot. We're going to stick with the scatter plot. Remember, we put our X values in list 1, so that should say that. We put our Y values in list 2. Where it says mark, that's basically just saying, like, do you want it to show little boxes or dots or plus signs? Doesn't really matter. And then on my calculator, I can actually even kind of change the color. All right. The next thing we want to do is if I hit graph, which remember, graph is right here, I'm not going to see anything. And the reason why is because my scale is kind of messed up. So I want you to go ahead and hit the window button. And this is good advice anytime you're trying to, you don't see a picture on your screen and you're trying to figure out what are the best options that are here. So now go back to your X's. Your X's range from 1 to 7. So let's pick a range of 0 to 10. And let's count by ones. Makes sense, right? Let's go to our Y's. Our Y's kind of range from 15 all the way up to 140. So I'm going to pick 0. I'm going to go up to 150. And then where it says Y scale, I'm going to count by 5s, just because that way I have kind of a larger increment. Like if I was going to actually make this graph by hand, I wouldn't count by 1s. All right, let's hit graph. Let's see what happens. Voila. Those are all your dots. And so what you're going to kind of notice, do you see kind of how this is an exponential curve? And so those are just my data points. What we're going to do is we're going to have the calculator generate what we call a line of best fit. And what this does, it's called it's called exponential regression. And it's going to create an equation that estimates what the exponential equation for this particular function would be. So to do that, we are going to hit stat. We are going to arrow over to calc. We're going to arrow down all the way down till it says 0 or exponential regression. So that's EXP regression. Hit enter. Yours probably will look something like this. Your X values are in list 1. Your Y values are in list 2. Don't worry about your frequency list. The only thing I want you to do is in order for us to see the graph, but basically your calculator is going to generate an equation. In order to get that equation to be on your graph, you need to tell it where to store it. So it says store regression equation. And I want you to hit the vars button down here, arrow over to Y vars, hit enter, and hit enter again because we're just going to have it store in Y1. So basically I've hit vars, I arrowed over to Y vars, and then hit function, hit enter, and then hit enter again. So I just basically told my calculator to store this equation that it's going to generate into my Y1 so I can see the graph. Hit enter, hit enter. All right, so you get to this screen. This tells me a lot of information. So here's my general equation. This is what the calculator generated for my A value and my B value. So if I write this down, I get y equals about 11.39, and then my B value is about 1.45. So that would be the equation. So rather than do it the way I did it with the like solving the system, you can have your calculator generate it. And then in order for you to see it on the graph, just hit the graph button and you will see how close that equation comes to hitting all of our points. And you'll notice that it hit, like, this one is a little bit underneath it and this one's a little bit above it. So remember, this is a line that is the best estimate. And so a lot of times this comes in handy if you're looking at data and you're trying to generate an equation for it. You can do linear regression, you can do exponential regression, you can do quadratic regression. So this is just another way to generate the equation of a data set using your calculator. All right. Good luck with your practice. If you have any questions, make sure you contact your teacher. Thanks, everyone.